Well, good morning, everybody. 14th of April, 2025. It's 6:35 in the morning. Yes, yes, a little bit early. And temperature is actually not so bad. It's, I think, well, my cell phone says it's 4 degrees, and I'm not going to disagree with that. Oftentimes it's very much off, but this time I think maybe it's about right. And as you see, here's a puddle over here on this little dirt road back area, kind of area next to I don't know what it is, an automobile repair place or something. So there's no ice there. No ice. Please, no ice. Okay. Bez lut, whatever they say in Russian, I don't know. Forgot what the word for ice is. Okay. As you see, I got my People's Republic of China hat on, and I'll start off talking about Xi. He proposed to Trump, and of course I haven't heard anything about it since that time, but he proposed to Donald Trump that the two of them go to 0% tariffs. And it kind of makes you wonder, well, then how can that be that China will be ripping off the United States if it's both zero? I don't know. Maybe there are other mechanisms, but to charge the other people for their exports or whatever, but obviously these people are smart enough to know how they can get around it themselves anyway and charge, certain things. Like I said, I was in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and they have, let's just say, tariffs of all automobiles coming in from wherever it's at 150%. So in other words, you buy the vehicle again and another 50% on top of that just to get it into the country. It's incredible. Unless you are like the comptroller of customs, who gives himself a special deal. Actually, what he did, you still pay 150%, but they just switch around the blue book value. And anybody that's bringing in some car, if you're not like a politician or whatever, then you pay the high blue book value, and 150% off the high blue book. And if you are, an important person in government or whatever, sweet talk, I have no idea. However it works, but then you can get 150% off of a lower blue book valued car. And I had a problem with the comptroller of customs. He purposefully way overcharged me. Something that's 5% duty, he was charging me huge amount. I mean, all this, he did it a couple times, and I went to the prime minister and I told him about it. They put up a special, a customs appeal board for me. It took a long time. This took me 3 years, and it was like it was only about $220 or $30 or something like that, but I stuck to my guns and I got my money back, even though they really brutalized me in that meeting. And I won't get into that. It takes a lot of acting or whatever like that. So anyway, I got my money back, and then they tried it again in customs, and I got my money back. And of course that was a big mark against this guy. I know this lawyer. He's a lawyer, by the way. And then he got caught cheating. Somebody took photos of his car and showed that it that it was a much higher blue book value than what he claimed it to be, that he brought in. So those two things actually got the guy, well, you know what happens, they don't fire somebody, they make them resign. In the so-called civilized countries, they fire you over here, they fire you in Belarus, they fire you in Russia and a lot of other countries, but in the United States and a lot of countries, you're just made to resign. So, and that's what happened to him. Anyways, so let's get on. Let's keep going. That's that has nothing to do with Xi and tariffs. Well, it does have to do with tariffs. But let's keep going. Okay. So, I'll tell you what. If you go to zero, obviously China's going to win. China produces vastly far, far, far more than the United States. And I know that because I was importing things. I was living in a country, like I said, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I had to import like packaging, labels, or whatever, you name it. And India and China, you get far better deals than you do from the United States. You pay much more from the United States, and then locally a lot of time they don't make that kind of stuff, or it's lower quality, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, and you get some terrible crappy quality from China too. You got to be a little bit careful. There was a guy, he had a factory, he was making among other things rum, and he needed to get bottles, so he, to get a container full of glass bottles. Every time he had to go to China to make sure that they were doing it properly, that he didn't get some kind of a junky stuff, whatever. I ordered, got some special deal on some packaging. The packaging wasn't so impressive, and then I found a place in India, and I got far better quality packaging. And of course I could get smaller numbers, and China normally was demanding that you get 30,000. I only got 1,000 of those from China. Like I had to wait until somebody was making some order, they had some extra or something like that, and the quality was bad, like I say. And then I had those 1,000 for a long time, and I was ordering thousands from India in the meantime. So I still had those things from China because of the bad quality for many years. So anyway, let's just keep going on to that. There's a high academic official in Sweden. He stated yesterday that it is hatred towards the Russians so intense that they, meaning Ukraine, are willing to sacrifice any number of human lives. And of course, a lot of this will probably certainly extend to, say, the Baltic states and a lot of countries. And it's really incredible. And that's something I always touch on. How can you possibly hate to such an extent, And that's why, it's called the Hate Russia Club. And it's like, you remember, if a lot of you people that are watching this are maybe around similar age to me, and you remember the Cold War and all that was going on there, and it's like, it's even worse now. It's like, it just amazes me. How can you get your people to be so engulfed in hatred? It's like, I don't know. It's like, you ever mention the topic of Russia, Russians, anything. Look at like Zelensky. He said he hates everything Russia. He is there to exterminate everything. He said that, And there's a lot of Ukrainians like that. They want to exterminate everything that is Russian. Destroy the church, and the church is actually a Greek Orthodox church, but just so happens to have roots there in Russia, and they had the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but then they changed it to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and they changed a lot of things, and they had symbols that are more common to Ukraine, like their pitchfork and all that kind of crap, and said they changed a lot of stuff, anything just to get rid of Russia. And then they all the priests and all that, some are put in prisons and all, it's just anything that is Russian. And I think, was it yesterday, they were tearing down the last statue of Pushkin, the poet Pushkin from St. Petersburg. They're taking that down in Russia. They made a noose, like the kind that you hang people on, and then they were advertising for a bulldozer, and they do that in the Baltic states too. Anything that is Russian, hate, 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 hate. Wow. Okay, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal the Precious. The Prime Minister, I don't know what sort of power this guy has. He just runs around also, the hate Russia, stuff like that, like all of these higher officials do. Most of them are devoted Nazis, obviously. So you have to be virtually a Nazi in the West nowadays to hold any power. They don't call them Nazis, but they are Nazis. That's what Nazism is all about. So, and it's not against the Jews, it's against the Russians, of course, trying to make it go global. And Shmyhal, the precious, what did he say? He came out and he suggested that Europe should be built around Ukraine. It's like I was always saying, the master race. Germany was the same way under old Adolf. He wanted to make all of Europe, around Germany. And of course, he actually had maybe a certain capability to do so back then, but Ukraine actually doesn't. And what else did it say? Built around Ukraine, they can rediscover its identity, is what he was saying. And I wanted to add to that Russia, and you'll see why, they've never been against Ukraine joining the European Union. They've never been against that. They, of course, are against Ukraine joining NATO, because their whole plan, of course, is to destroy Russia. That is their whole thing. They eat, sleep, drink, they dream. Everything is to hate Russia, hate, destroy Russia, destroy everything Russian. And of course, even if most of us are wondering, well, what the heck? Where does this come from? And you're Russian yourself, basically. What was one of the first major Russian cities was Kiev. It's unbelievable. And you remember Zelensky saying Russians are not people, they're not humans, they're a species. And all those people that are in those eastern areas, one main reason why there is a war is he told them if they have any sort of sympathy towards Russia, they should pack their bags and get out and go somewhere else. Because we're having the Hate Russia Club here. This is the Hate Russia country. And of course, that's what Europe was trying to do, of course, including Biden and Nuland and all those, is to create an anti-Russia. That's what the whole deal is, to get an anti-Russia. And of course, the whole dream is to expand this. They were already working on that in the Baltic states and Poland. And by the way, they were working on that very much in Belarus, the country that I am in right now. A lot of indoctrination. I just leave it at that. Okay. And, Russia, like I said, they don't want them in NATO, but they don't care if they go into the into the EU. And Viktor Orban, he doesn't even want them in the EU. And, you start to look, well, why is it? Because Orban is not against Russia. He's not a hate Russia guy, neither like Fico. And so why doesn't Orban want Ukraine to just come into the EU as long as it's not into NATO? And the reason is, and you can, it's very strange, but Vladimir Putin and the Russians, they have the same idea as Orban, even though it's completely opposite. One says, yes, come into the EU. The other says, no way, come into the EU. And the reason is that both of them know, and Vladimir Putin, he doesn't have any super love for Europe. He would like to trade with Europe, but he knows, and I think they've even said that in the Russian government, that if Ukraine goes into the EU, not NATO, you know what would happen if they go into NATO. They would be pushing and pushing and pushing, and they would be the main driving force with Great Britain to make a war against Russia because of their hatred. But if you go into the EU, Putin knows that would destroy the EU. They know about Ukraine. And I'm not a big expert on the history of the Soviet Union, but I know for a fact, because there's just way too much evidence out there, that Ukraine was draining the Soviet Union. And if you put Ukraine into the European Union, and Orban knows this as well, they will drain Europe. Europe will cease to exist as the entity that it is today. They will not be a power. If Ukraine goes in there, Ukraine will drain. They will drain every bit of nutrients and blood from the European Union like you would not believe. They're doing it even now. They're taking all of this money, billions and billions, like you say. You all know. They're draining billions and billions and billions of dollars from the West. And it's like, where does it go? I don't know. It's going to a lot of pockets, a lot of corruption. I'm sure there's some corruption always in the West as well, but a lot of that, 10% for the big guy, as I always say. And you all know that, that was a Hunter Biden thing, that when he was doing his dealings all over, and the business partner of Hunter Biden, he admitted, and of course it's in emails, it's in Hunter Biden's emails, that all this money that would be flooding into Hunter Biden in those days, his dealings with China, his dealings with Ukraine, there was 10% for the big guy. And we all know that Daddy was the big guy, old Uncle Joe, or Daddy Joe, Sleepy Joe. Okay, so Sleepy Joe was getting 10% all the time. Makes you kind of wonder. Joe Biden, he was sort of, he was just he was kind of a well-to-do but lower middle class type of guy when he was in politics for his first couple of years. And now the guy is a big multimillionaire, and you don't get that way. You do not get that way in public service, even if you are like a senator. You don't get that way, a big multimillionaire. But old Joe did. And you have to also wonder, and a lot of people talk about how Obama became very, very wealthy. He was, like, when he first became president, I think they said his wealth could be, which is also very, very strange, could be, I think, as much as like $2.2 million or whatever. And by the time he left the White House, I think he was at $28 million. So anyhow, and I think it was, Ann Coulter or somebody talking about this, his unexplained wealth, his great wealth, Obama. So, but let's just keep going. Anyway, they can go ahead, like Putin says, go ahead into the EU. let him do it. I tell you what, maybe he should be pushing for Ukraine to go into the EU, and he should welcome it. Maybe he should pay them to take Ukraine into the EU, and then just see what happens to the EU. There's no way you're going to get rid of that corruption. I don't think even, I'll tell you what, my biggest faith would be that Lukashenko would have to go there and take care of it. And I don't know if he's got 30 years in government to do that. It just doesn't happen overnight. He did a lot in a very short time in Belarus, getting rid of a lot of corruption here. And it's very difficult to even keep it from, coming, especially when there is, of course, corruption. Maybe it's not huge in the Baltic states. There is corruption, obviously, quite a bit in Poland, and there's massive corruption in Ukraine. And I'm just talking about all of these states that border Belarus, and sure, there's actually more corruption in Russia as well. How much, I don't know, what levels, but it's certainly nothing like Ukraine. And it's not huge. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Russia has the amount of corruption, and I'm talking about even the little guys, because, it's a huge country, and you can't catch everybody. Some of these guys, they come into Belarus too, but then they try to pull their things. I could tell you some instances, but, I don't know, make them... I'll mention it in some other videos, where they were robbing people in cars. I've talked about it before. And these people were coming from Russia. And Lukashenko caught them, by the way. And that's one reason why a lot of people in all of the East, including the Ukrainians, they love Lukashenko, because he's a people-minded person. And, you start robbing the people, Lukashenko is going to come after you. So, anyway, let's see. Okay. Yeah. Well, what I was going to put in this word, I wrote it down here. So it's like, you put Ukraine into the EU, and you're going to hear a great big sucking sound. It's going to suck money like you would never believe, and then the Ukraine is going to complain that it's not enough, that you have to send them and give them more money. Well, that's incredible. It is. I've heard about this stuff for many decades already. So I mentioned that in another video. Okay. And makes you wonder if Ursula von der Leyen knows. What about Kaja Kallas? Kaja Kallas, she was the prime minister from Estonia, but of course she's been involved, and her family has been involved in corruption as well for quite some time. And of course she has a seething hatred of Russians as well. Of course, like I said, you can't get in unless you hate Russia. You can't be a big politician. Okay, U.S. continues their bombing of Yemen, however you say it. And last night they said so far there's 6 people that they killed in these other bombings, and it was a ceramics factory, I guess, this time. And more are expected to die of their injuries, but at the present time I think it's 6 dead and 13 injured. And again, Yemen shot down another $30 million, what is it, a MQ-9 drone, from the United States. Makes you wonder, they should, if I'll tell you what, if they were so attached to Iran would probably give them that technology which allows them to actually land the drones. Instead of shooting them down, they could land them. And when the United States started spying on Iran, that's what Iran was doing. They were landing the drones, and the U.S. doesn't send any of those drones over Iran anymore. Actually, if you want to be really truthful, the U.S. is actually scared of Iran. And Iran also has some weapons that they don't know about, and Trump was saying, we have weapons that you would never believe and all that, and they probably do have something. But, I mean, how more lethal can you get than a nuclear bomb? It not only kills thousands and thousands of people, it destroys the environment for hundreds and hundreds of years. I don't know, can't get much worse than that, actually, unless it's going to be weapons like the Orishnik that the Russians developed, which you actually can use. It doesn't destroy the environment, it is pinpoint accurate, and it is hypersonic. So, I don't know. Can you get worse than that? Maybe so. Yes. Well, they have like the chemical weapons, and the U.S. has these like nerve agents and stuff like that. I don't know how many of these, they gave components to the Ukraine, and it's a very well-known fact. And these are some very horrible weapons as well, It's like, I don't even want to go into the horrible things that it does to you. We learned about that in the military. I went through some chemical training and all that sort of a deal. And some certain gases and things, they even made us breathe them and all that. It's really terrible, but I won't go into that. It was at Fort McClellan, Alabama, which was where the chemical school was. And there's places in there where no human beings are not allowed. It's all blocked off now. I don't think that I went into those areas in those days back in the 1980s. But yeah, they closed the entire base down, not because of that necessarily, but there are those areas. Maybe it is because of that, but there are some of those areas that no human is allowed to go there anymore. Maybe they'd have to remove a lot of the soil and things like that. Matter of fact, Belarus did that when this thing went off in Chernobyl. You know, they moved heaven and earth, and Belarus was using bulldozers and things to remove lots of different soil in lots of areas. Some place was so badly contaminated that Belarus has a certain area right on the border of Ukraine. And of course, most of the damage from Chernobyl, you know, in the 1980s happened to Belarus, not to Ukraine. And the world was flooding millions and millions and millions to Ukraine. They didn't give anything to Belarus, even though Belarus suffered the worst from the Chernobyl incident, because the Chernobyl is right near the border, and the prevailing atmosphere, the winds and stuff, they dropped it all across the border in an area in Belarus. And people go in there. Nobody lives there. People go in there, and there are certain types of agriculture that you can do there, apparently. So people, you know, go in by buses, and they actually do things. And you can go there on tours for the most part, but not right now because of this military operation. Matter of fact, I was going to go there, and like it's a tour, and you go inside, and you have to be escorted, and you have to be inspected as you leave and all that. And they don't do like in Ukraine. Ukraine, you know, they put some children's dolls around, you know, old dolls in the thing, you know, to make everybody have all this sympathy and you know, and Belarus doesn't do that. They just tell you, and they tell you the facts. It's probably all in Russian. I don't know how much of it I would understand. Maybe I'd have to phone up on some. But anyway, like I said, I don't think they have those tours anymore, because they have some military down there, because Ukraine, you know, has mined the border and put all kinds of stuff. And you know, there's a belief that it's very possible Ukraine could invade Belarus, because they've made some attacks with some drones and things, and they fly over. You know, I think Belarus had shot them down, but I think there's even Russians stationed down there. That's where they're at, just in case Ukraine decides to come across the border. Maybe I can actually go there, and when my school is over, I would look into that. I don't know. I'll find out. Okay. The soon-to-be new leader of Germany, Merz, he again said he wants to give these Taurus missiles and these systems to Ukraine. And there's a big difference between the Taurus systems and the ATACMS or the Storm Shadow. They have a much longer range, and they're more sophisticated. They definitely need Germans to operate them. So that would be the direct participation of German official troops, not mercenaries, official troops in Ukraine, fighting against the Russians. So that's an escalation, undeniably, and Merz wants to do that. So he says, well, you know, the French they sent their Storm Shadow, you know, whatever their version of Storm Shadow is, and the United States has ATACMS there. And I think even that those countries actually even have their soldiers there helping Ukraine and the targeting, you know, getting a satellite, you know, the acquisition via satellite, things like that, you know. And they had that, like I said, we had this stuff back in the 1980s. Back in our days, we had something called, I think we called it a DMDG. It was like back then even, it was quite sophisticated. But we had even mobile types of phones, even though they were big and they required a huge battery. And you know, we called them MRTs, mobile radio telephones, back then. And you know, it was something that was very unusual back in those days. But now you got cell phones all over. But anyway, we had these things that are like the size of a laptop, and you contact a satellite, and you send information, and you know, the unit I was in is they call combat spies. They're combat spies, and you know, our people there trained. You go across enemy lines, you know, heavily camouflaged. You carry a lot of water with you, you know, and some nutritious food items and all, and you spy with your binoculars and things like that, and you see how many troops the enemy has, and you type it into this little thing, and it goes to a satellite, and it gets sent back to a station so that they know how many tanks, how many soldiers, what kind of weapons they have, things like that. So, you know, just if you guys are interested in knowing that sort of thing. So, like I said, they have U.S. soldiers there, and the U.S. is still sending weapons, and they're still sending the ammunition to Ukraine. Even if Trump doesn't come out and admit it, it's a definite positive thing. You know, otherwise you would see Ukraine crying But they're not doing that right now. So, because they're getting their stuff. They're getting their stuff. Okay, what else? Okay, you guys heard about this, I'll end with this. This bomb, or this so-called attack by Russia in the Sumy area across the border in Ukraine, supposedly, and some civilians died and all that. And what we get over here, maybe in the pro-Russian type of media, is that either it was a false flag, and a lot of people were warning that Ukraine would make a false flag attack. I don't know how many military thinks it was a military gathering, and they have civilians there, and Ukraine does that all the time, and they do that a lot so that Russia will not hit those areas, because then there will be some civilian casualties. It's sort of like a Bucha, and I think it was one of the highest media people, Simona, whatever I forgot her name, from RT, and she was saying that she was warning that they were going to do this, and she was warning on a lot of these news programs that they're going to do a false flag, and of course there it was, and it's probably so, and it looks like, because Russia is trying to investigate, did they do anything at all there, and they find no information that Russia bombed anything there, and then there are photographs or films supposedly of some trucks parked there, and some people are suspecting that Ukraine had put some bombs in some trucks, and they blew them off to kill some of their military and some civilians as well. And I don't know how many. It's not like really, really big numbers. I think maybe total casualties altogether is 30, which, that's a lot of people still when you think about it. And I guess a lot is relative, like the United States, or look at, if you're Israel, that's not a lot. A lot is when you get over 100 or something like that. And then, over a period of time, they killed tens of thousands of innocent people. And, they're bombing still as well. And last night, Israel bombed southern Lebanon, which is normal. I mean, how can you even report on the stuff that Israel does? They're bombing somebody every night, all the time. And that's only the stuff we hear about. You don't even know. So, and the United States is endlessly bombing Yemen. I don't know if they're still doing the 24/7, where they're bombing them 24 hours a day, but they're bombing them every day at least. And like I said, in that one bombing raid, they killed 6, and every day you're hearing about 9 getting killed. I don't know how many they've killed altogether now, but I think Yemen has maybe only killed like 6 people in their bombing things. They've attacked some ships and then some things in Israel. I think it might be 6. And Yemen also last night, they fired a hypersonic missile, and I think there was a couple missiles that got through. I think maybe there was only one hypersonic, and I think they aimed that at some airport in Israel, and it did get through apparently. I mean, Israel tried to put out some information as if it didn't get through, but it did apparently get through. But they're trying to hide all this, any kind of destruction that Yemen does to Israel. And they show these, whenever Yemen sends things up, they have nearly 100 all over Israel. They have sirens going off, to make everybody go for shelters and all this sort of stuff, all over practically the entire country of Israel, whenever they sense or know that something is in the air on the way. And like I said, some things do get through. I think Yemen doesn't have the capacity to make large amounts of these things, so maybe they're making like one hypersonic missile every 4 weeks or whatever. I'm just guessing. I don't think they have like I said, this capacity to do that, the machinery. And the United States keeps trying to bomb every place they possibly can that they hear of anything whatsoever. And it's like, Israel, I don't know. Israel just bombs for fun. They bomb and they kill. And I guess you keep hearing about them destroying the last hospital in Gaza. I've said that. This will be the 3rd time now. But I think what happens is they bomb the last hospitals, and then doctors and things. I think there was a surgeon. This guy was from the United States, I guess, surgeon. And, what they do is they bomb a hospital and they try to set something up. They gather certain equipment. They maybe try to start another thing in maybe an older hospital or someplace, or they clear it out and they maybe try to refab it, and they set up maybe another hospital, and then Israel bombs that again, and it's just constant. And so they try to make sure that none of these people can get treated, that they all die. You know, that's part of this. What do you is it ethnic cleansing or genocide? I don't know, but that's what it's all about. So anyway, that's what's going on in the world today. And you guys, thanks for joining me. I have to, you know, say that I'm grateful. You know, I tell you what, I go to these places that are not really that interesting to look at, and that a lot of you keep watching the videos, you know, and I'm grateful for that. And like I said, maybe in a few weeks, I think about a little less than 3 weeks, maybe I can get out and start doing some traveling or go to different places. I'm hoping to anyway, you know. But my objective, of course, is to stay alive. I have to start working at some point in time, and you know. But like I said, it's like an addiction to me to be putting this stuff out, and you guys probably news addicts too, and you know, trying to find true news and real facts and maybe things that other people are not reporting to you. It's like you want to be informed, because you never know if a lot of this stuff is going to actually apply to you. So anyway, well, some of you got to come to Belarus, and there's people putting out videos. Lots of people in Russia telling you about Russia. There's, I don't know, maybe 200 content creators that's in English talking in Russia about going to Russia. Some are more popular than others. There's this guy, what is that, a Scottish guy in Moscow. He seems to be pretty good. He gets a lot of views as well. And he came to Minsk. I would have liked to have met him. And here in Belarus, one of the more popular ones is the Irish Partisan. So he's been here quite a while, and knows a lot of places and things like that. There are places he hasn't gone, and I'd like to meet with him, and maybe I would even go on a few places with him. He seems like a really decent guy. And you know, he's also interested in politics, by the way. He doesn't mention that so much, or practically not at all. He does mention economics, you know, the difference between the West and over here on his videos, and he doesn't want to leave here. And you know, he explains to you why. But anyway, maybe I'll meet him. I don't know. He hasn't contacted me yet. He's well, he does. He says he's made a few comments on my videos at times. But yeah, his name is Neil, I guess. Like to meet you. Okay. Anyway, that's it for today. Oh, any of you guys, if you watch the Irish Partisan, maybe send this video to him. And yeah, like I said, I'd like to show him some places maybe he hasn't been before. Interesting things like that. So, okay, that's it. I'll end. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.